there I was looking for a job. And incidentally, all my curatorial experience had been in the decorative arts. And my first boss, then at the Dorothy Kaczynski, then at the Dallas Museum of Art, later director of the Phillips collection and retired about a year ago from that, said, well, I like you, but what I really need is an Americanist. You know, I see that you've sort of done some American coursework and your artist sort of worked in America. Do you think you could learn American art? And do you think you could do American art? And I was very young and I said, well, okay, yeah, sure. Because that's what you do when you want a job. And I became an Americanist with a sort of transatlantic perspective. And Emily, you and Regina and I have sort of talked about, Regina has a very similar formation too. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not patting Regina and myself on the back, but now, we see young people who are in graduate school and they're doing way more sort of pan-geographic. They're more interested in the Atlantic world, as we now call it. You were a pioneer in the Atlantic world when other people weren't, because Emily wonderfully did not just colonial artists in the US colonies, but also, of course, their British formation. And I think that's more the norm now than when Regina, you and I were students. But I like to think, and this is probably, again, very self-congratulatory, I think it made us a little bit open to thinking about stories that could be told.
And it's so interesting you said that. I'm glad you brought in Regina, because she actually did her PhD in Britain in American art. So it tells us a lot about the field, that it has changed in that way, and that is there are lots of PhDs that are being done in other parts of the world now, that's an area where things have evolved. In fact, why don't we talk about that a bit? I think you brought it up, but there might be some other things that you might want to relate to that, which is, how have you seen the field of American art evolving? Yes, exactly in that way, since you entered the field, and maybe thinking about that in terms of the scholarship, the art market, mm-hmm. and collecting trends, maybe how American art is presented in an art museum context. So how has it evolved in any or all of those contexts?
So one thing where you can see the evolution is there's just many more of us than there were when you and I were babies. It used to be you knew everybody.
We were a very exclusive club.
We were very friendly. We all got along. We all did. Everybody liked each other. Mm-hmm. But it was smaller. You sort of knew everybody. And now there are so many, in a very exciting way, there are so many people coming into the field, both in academia and also in the museum world, which is good. It is what we needed. But really, actually, if you want to think about the museum world, it is actually the real estate, so to speak, devoted to the art of the Americas gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you want to think about SAMA as sort of being in the front guard, Emily was talking about, and many of you saw this, there was the collection, but there wasn't a curator. Right. And the galleries for a long time were in a different location in the building, a smaller location. And 10 years ago, Katie Luber, the then director, initiated the move of the collection to ground zero, front and center. So at SAMA, we did that. We ate up more space, so to speak, gave more space over, not just for American art, but then also for Texas art, which had been the stepchild of the stepchild.
Right.
And you see whole wings at other institutions being devoted to art of the Americas, like the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. Houston has done a reinstallation. Dallas has gone through several. So, if you want to think about, real estate is power. And those of you who own real estate know this, right? It holds its value. This is Texas. Land is important. In the museum world, real estate in the gallery is important as well. American art takes up more and more and more than it did 20 years ago. It always deserved that footprint, but it's getting the footprint now because I think not only is, more people are realizing just how good the art is, but also more people are interested in it than they used to be, because American art can tell you every story that you want to follow, from the 16th century
Mhm.
up to the 21st century and beyond. And I think we've always been, as a field, less territorial about, well, I only do the 18th century. I only do the 19th century between, the Hudson River School and I stop when it gets to American Impressionism.
Right.
We've never been that specialized because, quite frankly, at other times you maybe had one curator for all of American art. But we're seeing people staffing up. We're seeing more granularity in terms of staff. There's not just a curator. Now there'll be 2 or 3. And we've never just sort of, we all love the Met. It's the mothership of us all. But I always love looking at people's email addresses from the Met, particularly like in decorative arts, because they'll say, and I say this with love because I love my colleagues there, but they'll say, I do European glass except for German enameled glass. And you're like, really? You're able to take one whole thing and just go, we've never been able to do that in American art. And I think that's been to our credit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's actually a good segue to the next question, which would be about how, interestingly, both you and Regina worked on the American Made exhibition that is currently on view. You actually originally conceived the exhibition, and then of course Regina staged it here. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed about the show is that Regina decided not to do the sort of march through time, which I think is a perfectly valid and wonderful way in which to install American art. What I think that the installation did was to kind of wryly make it about pluralism. The way it's organized is each artwork sings on its own terms. There's no order. You don't go in any prescribed order. There's no lesson, so to speak, to be learned. And what I've noticed is that people are constructing their own stories, which gets back to what you were saying about, I mean, American art is really about everything at the end of the day. So could you talk a little bit about, since we do have that show on view and it's closing on Sunday and it's been a great success. Thank you so much for, getting it all started. Do you want to comment about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, the show is beautiful. So I hope you've all seen it. And if you haven't, you're coming back tomorrow
At 10.
Sunday to see it, and because it's fabulous. And Regina has done an installation that is very beautiful, and it's completely different than the installation that I was envisioning when I was playing with it a few years ago. And that's wonderful. That's the best thing, to see when your colleagues work and you think works of art, and then when you see how somebody else has interpreted them, and quite frankly done it probably better than I would have. It's like, isn't that terrific? Because good art survives, right? Good art is capable of being installed in multiple ways, and it's always a new conversation based upon both the deliberate proximity of things, and then what I love about our Cowden space here, and see, I just said I'm slipping back into the Sama mode.
That's good, we like that.
Is that Cowden lends itself to what I call happy accidents, where if you turn one way or if you turn the other, you catch completely random adjacencies that I will admit, as curators, we don't actually realize that we're doing. Every curator will tell you this. And then suddenly you see a whole new conversation that is something you did not intend when you were doing your initial layout, but it's a wonderful conversation. So there's never any one, there's no right way to do something, but I will also tell you there is a wrong way, and I can't describe it, but you know it when you see it, and that's not what you have.
Like porn, right?
Exactly, exactly. But the point of this is that this is a wonderful show, and the show is due to the generosity of an amazing collector, Dr. Diane DeMel Jacobson, who fell in love with American art. As a little girl, she grew up in New York, and as a little girl, she went to the Met, and she fell in love with American art and began collecting it, but thoughtfully, really thoughtfully, and also bravely, because she's become very interested in, she's very passionate, like Regina, about inclusivity and about adding works, particularly by women makers. And in recent years, she's moved into modernism and abstraction, which was something that she first admitted years ago to me was not her comfort zone. And so it's really wonderful how that collection has evolved. And everything in some respects comes back to Sully. I met Diane through the Thomas Sully retrospective.
I was waiting for that to happen.
I mean, everything comes back to Sully. My dog is named Sully. So, you know, there you go. I don't have his monogram tattooed on me somewhere, and I probably should have at some point gotten that.
We can help you with
Yeah,
that.
the point is that she has one of the most beautiful Sully female portraits, and which is in the show. And so I got to know her. I borrowed that work for a Sully retrospective, which led to a relationship with Sama. And for a number of years, Sama has been the recipient of wonderful strategic long-term loans to the collection that you all have enjoyed. And maybe, you know, maybe you haven't noticed that the credit line was a loan, and we didn't mind that, you know. And it led to the conversation of, wouldn't it be nice to show the collection as a whole? Because it has been living in different homes, Diane's homes, but also with different museums. She's a good friend to museums.
Many museums.
And so she was not, she had to be talked into it. She didn't want the publicity. She didn't, you know, she just, and then she started thinking about it. And I know Marie had a conversation, and Rosario Laird had a conversation with her, and Katie had a conversation. Our good friend Todd Herman at the Mint, whom she trusts very closely, had a conversation. And she started coming around, and this show wonderfully developed and really took on a life of its own. And I've been thrilled to see it take off and become something wonderful, and how Regina has just sensitively made it her own in a way that is completely different than the way it was presented at other venues, which is totally cool.
And which were all beautiful. Yep. And I was actually at the Mint when it opened, and it was one of the great, you know, we all talk about great moments in our careers, but just to be able to witness Diane when she saw it for the first time. This was the first time she had seen the collection together. Because when she buys artworks, they go on loan to different museums. And she obviously teared up because she was honoring the deathbed wish of her husband and putting this collection together and sharing it with the public. I'd like to ask you about collecting, because I do think having this, you know, I think one of the things that surprises people is that over 100 works, and it's a tiny fraction of her whole collection, 97 different artists, et cetera, et cetera. To talk about the different collecting opportunities. We've been talking about that a lot with our board, with visitors who come on tours. And, you know, you and I have both witnessed and have worked on building collections in the art market. I mean, it is a fickle beast.
Yes.
And it is an unregulated beast. And I don't, and so I'm just wondering where you see those market opportunities today.
Well, the thing that has always been an opportunity and stays an opportunity and continues to be an opportunity, and just sculpture. American sculpture is still a great opportunity from all periods. And people are afraid of sculpture. I used to be afraid of sculpture. When you're in graduate school, you look at images of sculptures, and maybe you only see it from like one angle, depending on how it's photographed, or if you're lucky, they might show you like the front and the back. But you don't experience it because it's in the round and you're not with it. You need to be with it in the gallery to engage with it. So that's one reason why I think sculpture frightens people. The other thing, quite frankly, is because it's a multiple often. So if it's cast, you know, people get, I don't know, how do I know if this is a good cast or a bad cast? You know, so I think there are reasons why people have been reluctant to get into it. Also takes up space, let's be honest, you know.
It is a big factor.
So, but for all of those reasons, there still are great examples of American sculpture from all periods by so many artists, and it still is really affordable. And, you know, I think that's always been and stays a great opportunity. I will say that I worked a lot with art of the colonial and federal period, as did you, and I think you would agree with me that we have seen those prices for artists like Copley and West, et cetera, go down, although the inventory is also
Not
gone
really,
down.
because there's no inventory. But
Yeah,
go ahead. I
but
hear your
yeah,
point,
but
though.
when they come
Yeah.
to market now, you
Mhm.
see that like their hammer prices are much, much less, with the exception of one gallery we won't name, who when they get them when they get them, and they never lower their prices.
Right. We know who we're talking about.
That being said, that, you know, in all areas, old masters and American old masters remain, in quotation marks, a bargain. But honestly, I would say that what's wonderful about American art is that there are still opportunities for anyone who's a collector to find one's passion, to find the art that speaks to you. And you can still have quite a wonderful journey, getting to know it, meeting dealers, meeting like-minded collectors, and making that area your own. It has not been picked over to the extent that, you know, that you can't. And I always think about what I've heard from Marie Halff, what I've heard from Harriet and Harmon Kelly about the fun journeys they had as collectors, getting to know other collectors, getting to know other curators, getting to know like-minded colleagues as they formed their collections, because that's part of it too. You're collecting the art because you love the art, but also it makes you part of a world that is very intellectually stimulating, socially stimulating, and of course, aesthetically stimulating. So I think it's you know, there's some tried and true things I would say, like sculpture, that's always an area. But honestly, it's really about going and looking and finding what speaks to you. And it is okay if what speaks to you, I always like to ask collectors, what's the first thing you ever bought? Because sometimes what the first thing you acquire is not what you wind up with, because it doesn't speak to you after a while, or its voice changes or something. And sometimes it stays, you know. But it's okay to shift. And also, if you have an interest in contemporary American art, you can't do any worse than start going to student shows and seeing where talent is emerging and where it's coming from. And it's a bit of a risk. You have to have a stomach for risk, but it's going to be affordable. And you might become that patron that an artist will always remember because you were their first sale, and you helped give them the confidence through that acquisition that they felt, I can actually be an artist. It's not just about having the degree, it's about having the belief and the support. So I guess in other words, you know, as a curator, we just like stuff. And so the point is there are still opportunities to find your stuff and follow your passion. And museums, we're in it for the long game. We are always going to want to know about your stuff. And we will always want to find a home in time when you are ready to give the public your stuff. Then we were also always ready to have that conversation. And we're ready to have the conversation with you along the way, because it's fun for us to work together with you and discover things together, and, you know,
And
share
just
our
sharing the
opinions.
knowledge.
Yeah,
to share
exactly.
lots of, I know that that is a perfectly valid approach. But what I've seen in American art, you and I were talking about this earlier, what we're seeing is this wonderful sort of, you know, I think you used the word full circle, because a friend of mine, you know, I was sort of bemoaning the fact that we didn't have as many collectors today in American art when you and I were first starting out. But it turns out that there's a new and younger generation that are interested in 18th, 19th, early 20th century American art, but for different reasons. So they might buy a Frederick Church or a Thomas Cole or a Worthington Whitridge, not because it's those artists, but because they're interested in wilderness, they're interested in landscape, they're interested in climate, they're interested in habitat. So I think that's kind of an interesting trend to be watching as some of these different areas of American art come in and out of focus. And I think Diane's show has been such a great way for people to kind of find their own painting, find what makes them sort of tick. I didn't mean to go into all that, but you brought it up. But before we go into the next section in our run of show, because we have 2 more parts to this evening, is, if Regina were sitting here, what kind of guidance or counsel might you give as someone who is so deeply knowledgeable about SAMA, about San Antonio, has a genuine love of San Antonio and the institution? Thank you. We love it when you say our. That's just fine. But as she embarks in her work, what might you say?
Well, first of all, I would say, Regina, as you know, but you need to remember, this is an extraordinary collection of American art. It's amazing. And it is due to a combination of things that are it's due to a combination of things that makes SAMA a very special place, which is it's due to visionary risk takers who fell in love with art and wanted to share their art with the city that they love. So that's number one. And the quality is exceptional. And there's so many things left to do with the collection here. I barely scraped the surface. There are so many ways to hang the collection thoughtfully. I did a very strict march through time, but I think Regina's giving you a taste of the complexity and the thoughtfulness and her aesthetic sensibility, and all of that's marvelous. So I would say keep having fun with that and run with that. And there's a great team of curators here. So it's like have those conversations with the wonderful curators here, our curators of ancient Mediterranean art, our curators of Asian art, our curator of contemporary art, all of our eventually there will be another curator of Latin American art. The staff will just continue to grow, as it should, because SAMA punches so far above its weight for its collection. Point of fact, I work at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. We only have 10,000 more objects than SAMA. So, SAMA is bursting at the seams with amazing art. So the point is I would say have fun. Have fun, collaborate with your colleagues, tell all sorts of unexpected stories, because this museum is often the first and the main place where 1.7 million people in this region experience art, along with other great institutions here, such as the McNay and also Blue Star in Ruby City, and a host of pop-ups and things like this. So embrace that sort of DNA of San Antonio and have fun. There's still so many stories left to be told. There is great art to borrow, to exhibit, to organize, to hopefully acquire. Within that, of course, I would be remiss if not saying, Regina, you're in Texas now. You need to learn that Texas art is American art. And it's often leading American art in every period. Remember, the first professional artists in this state were women. Remember that women were the first artists to embrace abstraction in this state. So there are so many ways to use American art, and particularly Texas art, to really think about what it means to be cutting edge in the arts. So I would just say have so much fun. And then I would also say, you're part of the story, is to say, what can we do together? I benefited from extraordinary supporters and members and patrons and colleagues, many of whom are in this room. And I hope that everyone does the same for Regina, as I know you've been doing it for Emily in her tenure here. So I think I'm going to be watching from just north of here, 668 miles to be exact. I'm going to be watching from there, keeping my eye on things, and coming back and visiting, to see what's going on. And I also really hope that in due course we can have, it would be very good to have a project together between the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art and the San Antonio Museum of Art. SAMA, NAMA. I mean, it really would work well together. And I think
we've always wanted to work together.
I think the compliments that we could do with the strengths of our American collections at the Nelson-Atkins and the strengths of the American collections at the San Antonio Museum of Art, could really tell fascinating stories together for the benefit of people in the Kansas City metro region and people in South Texas as well.
Well, I'm into that, and we're going to hold you to it.
You heard it, folks.
And I'm the one who is supposed to be the calendar girl, and I'm running a little bit late, but we're going to shift gears. I'm going to walk to the side and sort of disappear. William's going to come to the podium. He's going to go a little more in depth about the artist Thomas Sully.
Not the dog, the artist.
And then, but wait, let me disappear, because that was part of the whole choreography of this evening. As you can see, it's been very complicated.
Okay, so not the dog, but named after the artist.
Yeah.
This is Thomas Sully. This is him in old age. He lived long enough to be in the age of photography. And I just want you to see how genial and nice he is, because from all accounts, Thomas Sully was well loved. He spent the majority of his career in his adopted city of Philadelphia and working at 5th and Chestnut Streets. Today, there is an art theater there. They tore down his studio. But I just want you to see how art keeps you alert and happy. So it's not just about Sudoku. You also, if you make art, you will stay curious. Here he is, however, at 2 different points in his life. So this is how he saw himself. First in 1808 on the left, sort of in the act of looking. And although I dropped off the credit line inadvertently 20 years later in 1828 in a painting now in the collection of the Gibbs Museum, this is Sully, the slightly older but still young artist, in love with the romantic, tortured idea of the artist. Now, he wasn't romantic and tortured. He was romantic with a small r in the sense that he was very much in love with his wife, Sarah Annis Sully, and he loved his family, but he got involved with the capital R romantic movement about drama and energy and all sorts of things. And there's a point to that story. You know him best, most of us know him best as a portraitist. So here is one of his frothiest and most wonderful confections. The actress Fanny Kimball, Frances Ann Kimball, as Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, one of the stars of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, looking over her shoulder. Some of you may remember when we did the Sully retrospective here, we put that front and center as you walked into Cowden because I just loved the painting too much. As a portraitist, of course, Sama is blessed to have this extraordinary late career Sully of his beloved wife, Sarah Annis Sully, and their grand dog, Ponto, because like kids have done everywhere at time immemorial, when one of Sully's sons, Alfred Sully, went off west as a cadet after graduating from West Point. He dumped the dog with the parents and they didn't give it back, which, it
Happens all the time.
So although we know Sully as a portraitist, and here at SAMA, we have known him as a portraitist because of this iconic work, he actually also, during his lifetime, he was just as celebrated for what we call his fancy pictures, meaning they were fanciful. And they were fancies, they were imaginary creations. And he, in point of fact, did like nearly 600 of them. And he did them over and over and over again throughout his career, and he exhibited them frequently. And the historic imbalance that we've always done from the 20th century onward is to think about him as a portraitist. But these were the things that people actually saw more of, because portraits stayed in people's houses. These were what he exhibited in person. This mother and child was actually on a steamship, in the lounge of a steamship for 20 years, going up and down the Hudson. So think of the people that saw this as they were going about their business. There are multiple versions of this. This is the first and the best from the Butler Institute. Or this painting, The Lost Child, which exists in multiple versions. This one is in the Denver Art Museum, and it is a sort of darker fancy picture about a little child lost in the woods with only the faithful dog. There's a theme, right? Dogs and art. Sully loved dogs, he loved kids, he loved his family, but he worried about things. And I think this painting is an index of that worry. He did fancy paintings based upon stories, novels, plays, and in this case, fairy tales. This is Cinderella at the Kitchen Fire from 1843, a big, wonderful painting that was exhibited a lot right after he painted it, featuring his beloved daughter Rosalie as the model. And I show this, I never can get enough of this because this is the first acquisition I ever made as a curator. And I love it. And sometimes the second acquisition I'm embarrassed by. I bought an Edmund Tarbell for the name, and it was not a good Tarbell. And within a very short period of time, I bitterly regretted spending the money on that painting. And happily, it's not on view at the museum where it lives in storage. But this one I never get tired of, so you're lucky when at least, you're lucky when you still kind of respect the first one. I love this first one, and it is one of his best pictures. But that's what brings us to something that you're going to hear more of and see more of. An extraordinary opportunity for the museum that I invite Emily back to tell you a little bit about.
Thank you, and don't go, William. And Marie Halff, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, is not only a former board chair of SAMA, she is a longtime board member, supporter, an American art collector, one of the most dedicated philanthropists in our museum. She is loyal, she is dedicated, hardworking, funny, and did I say funny? A great storyteller and loads of fun. And she is also deeply thoughtful. And tonight she is dedicating a recent acquisition of American art acquired by her last fall and given to SAMA. And she is doing it in honor of William Rudolph, the first curator. And I wonder, Marie, if you would come up and say a few words.
I did have something planned to say, but everybody already said it.
Oh, no.
What I would just briefly like to say is that I'm really excited that here we are tonight and we're actually being able to give the painting to the museum and honor William and have it hang and people can see it, because I do think it's very, very pretty. And you're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say it's lovely and well done and beautifully composed and all of that, but it's just plain pretty too. When I was first aware of the Museum of Art, I realized that there was not a curator for the American Art Department, or organize exhibitions, or just put the paintings in order and see what needed to be done, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to thinking about that. There were other curators, they were just wonderful. But the poor American Art Department was just like the little orphan child, going along sort of on its own, but no cheerleaders, no nothing. So I took a deep breath and decided to talk with Katie Luber, who was the director of the museum, and I said, I noticed we don't have a chair for American art, and I would like to fund one. And she was excited. I didn't realize what was all involved, and I had no idea how horribly expensive it was going to be, but there we went, and we formed our committee and had some people down, and William came, and I'm so glad, because he was the best, and he's so enthusiastic, so talented, so knowledgeable, such a neat guy, fun friend to be with. We were so very, very lucky to have him. And I guess you realize that he's a big Thomas Sully fan, and we all learned that pretty quickly because you just couldn't have a real conversation without learning about his Sully's dogs, or his family, or where he traveled to, or what he painted, or what little hat was in the composition, or and his horses and his cows and his chickens and all of that. So William was just such a marvelous addition to the museum. And then he moved on to a better spot. That sounds like you died, but and left us. But I just felt like we needed to do something to recognize his marvelous contribution to the Museum of Art. And this Sully painting came up for sale at auction in the fall. And I had an idea, and I really even hadn't been drinking, and I I called Emily and I said, what if I bought this and gave it to the museum in honor of William? And she said she thought very calmly, that was a nice idea. So I did. And it came and it hung around my house. I mean, literally, it was on the wall for a while, and I loved it. And then it came down here. And I'm so excited that we're finally going to be able to show it and honor William, and because he's so special and was the very first American curator. And so tonight we're going to unveil it and everybody go see it, and I'm really excited.
Don't go, Marie. Remember, we're going to slip out. Yep, yeah. Okay, sounds good. So thank you, Marie. Thank you, William. And what's going to happen next is that we are going to go in a secret door and slip away magically and see you in just a moment. But what Trip Cardiff, our interim director of education, we also have other SAMA staff here. If you'll go out into the Great Hall, and go around towards the entrance and look down, you will see the painting. We're going to slip out quickly first and do a few photographs while we can. Please know you'll have ample opportunities to speak to Marie and William, and for you post-holiday shoppers, we are keeping the store open, but we'll see you in a few minutes in the galleries. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And happy 2024.